What's up, everyone? After the physical shackles of Rome, we now arrive at the political chains woven from gold and silk of the Ottoman palace. What would your life be like if you were brought to the 17th century Topkapi palace as a slave and castrated? This meant not just service, but owning the greatest secrets and being the Sultan's shadow. My life was a struggle that began with the denial of my sexual identity and rose through the corridors of absolute power. Let's examine the secrets of the palace and the power of the eunuchs. Don't forget to like the video, and I truly enjoy reading your own what-if comments. Life began as a slave from Africa or distant corners of the empire, with a traumatic process of castration. Undergoing this operation at a young age meant not just a physical injury for me, but the complete denial of my sexual identity and future. This traumatic experience was what made me safe for palace service. Interaction with the women of the harem was now impossible. Being brought to the palace was a liberation from the mining labor of Rome, but on the other hand, it imprisoned me in a golden cage. My existence was now reduced to serving only the master, the Sultan, and his family. This painful beginning was the first foundation of the strictness and discipline that would allow me to rise in the palace hierarchy. The palace was governed by a strict and complex hierarchy, and I started at the very bottom rung of this grand structure. My first duties usually involved waiting at the harem gates or serving more experienced Akas eunuchs. Serving the concubines was not just a duty for me, but also a process of learning about palace life, gossip, and political maneuvering. The eunuchs were divided into white eunuchs and black eunuchs. My future depended on which group I belonged to. I had to enforce the palace rules without the slightest error, as a mistake in the palace meant immediate punishment. Intelligence and adaptation were vital for survival in the palace. Although I was brought as a slave, the palace gave me a new identity and meticulous training. I would receive training in palace etiquette, Ottoman, Turkish, Persian, and religion, Islam. Learning the language and perfecting the palace manners was a necessity for me, as only in this way could I climb the hierarchy. This education made me a more valuable servant to the master. While an uneducated eunuch used only his physical strength, I could gain influence in the corridors of power through my knowledge. Reading, writing, and analyzing political events were my survival swords. The denial of sexual identity resulting from castration was a constant psychological struggle for me. I was neither fully male nor female. I was a neutral intermediary needed by the palace. The palace saw this status as proof of my reliability and my ability to serve in the harem. This physical trauma permanently separated me from the outside world, but it also gave me a unique power. All women and men, both in the harem and outside, viewed me differently. For me, this situation meant that the palace became my only home and the sole source of my identity. As chief black eunuchs, the role of guarding the harem's exterior was a great responsibility for me. Ensuring the security of the harem, punishing those who entered without permission, and regulating communication between the concubines and the Sultan were my duties. This position provided me with invaluable knowledge about the secret corridors and women's intrigues of the harem. To maintain order in the harem, I sometimes had to use physical violence or report directly to the Sultan. As black eunuchs, we had to enforce the strictest and most severe discipline in the palace. The absolute peak of the hierarchy was the title of Darasad Akosk or Kisler Akosk, chief black eunuch. Rising to this position meant becoming the absolute authority of the harem. As the Kisler Akoske, I was one of the three most important powers in the palace alongside the Grand Vizier and the Sheikh al-Islam. I managed all the harem's finances, personnel, and controlled all information conveyed to the Sultan by the valid Sultan's mother. This was not just a position for me, but the embodiment of the political alliance I formed with the valid Sultan and a shadow power. This position would make me one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the empire. Inside the harem, my role was unique. Being neither a male nor a female, my relationship with the concubines and harem women was neither close nor distant. The concubines would convey their messages or wishes they wanted to relay to the Sultan through me. The valid Sultan expected me to report all the intrigues and power struggles within the harem to her. These roles made me a confidant, a guardian, and an observer in the women's world. My survival depended on how well I understood the balance of power among the women in the harem and which woman I supported at what time. The palace's secret information network was my true source of power. Every piece of information, from whispers in the harem to decisions in the divan, passed through the eunuch's ears. My duty was to translate every seemingly insignificant gossip into critical information that could turn into a political move. Presenting the right information to the valid Sultan at the right time was the key to maintaining and advancing my position. All the corridors of the palace were filled with my secret ears and eyes. As an eunuch, my power lay not in wielding a sword, but in filtering and directing what the Sultan needed to know. The political intrigues of the palace were a daily chess game for me. The succession struggles between the Sultan's sons, the competition among the viziers, and the power of the valid Sultan. In all these balances, I was a shadow player. My loyalty to the valid Sultan was the source of my power, but if this alliance were to break, my end would also come. The removal of a Grand Vizier could depend on a single piece of secret information I provided. My presence was effective like an invisible hand even in the palace's biggest political decisions. Every day I had to predict which power would rise and which power would fall. The greatest honor in the hierarchy was entering the service of the Hazoda, the Sultan's private chamber. Serving here was the closest I could get to the Sultan. I prepared his coffee, accompanied him, and was present during his most private moments. Proximity to the Sultan meant not only status, but also personal security for me. Earning his trust allowed me to wield great power over everyone else in the palace. Knowing the Sultan's most private secrets was the biggest burden and the biggest advantage of my life. My presence in the Hazoda was proof that I had reached the heart of the palace, the center of absolute power. Eunuchesses were not merely servants or guards. They undertook important intellectual and cultural roles in the palace. Among us were those who were masters of calligraphy, musicians, poets, and managers of the palace library. This meant that a eunuch like me could gain value through cultural knowledge. Teaching calligraphy, presenting a rare manuscript to the Sultan, or conducting a musical evening would increase my prestige. These intellectual contributions showed that eunuchs like me transcended mere physical strength and service, becoming a part of the palace's cultural richness. Punishment for making mistakes in the palace was swifter and more brutal than punishments in the outside world. Even the smallest act of indiscipline could mean flogging or severe exile. The penalty for serious errors, especially revealing the Sultan's secrets or treason against the harem, was execution. My life was built upon a constant balance of rules and discipline. Even while walking the palace corridors, I knew I was being watched. This constant threat explained why the eunuchs were so disciplined and obedient. Punishments were not just physical pain, but also the price of the high position an eunuch held. Eunuchs would acquire immense wealth and property through their palace service. Those who reached high positions, like the Kisla Akosk, received large salaries, gifts, and bribes. This wealth was not just money for us, but also power and prestige. With the fortune we accumulated, we would establish foundations outside the palace, building mosques, schools, and fountains. This was our effort to leave a lasting impact on society, despite the denial of our sexual identity. For me, wealth was tangible proof of my future and my service to the Sultan. Eunuchs were not limited only to the inner walls of the palace. They took part in important external world interactions and diplomatic duties. The Kisla-Akosk would manage revenues belonging to important provinces like Egypt, giving him great authority outside the palace as well. I would undertake diplomatic roles, such as conveying the Sultan's private letters or gifts to foreign ambassadors. This situation was an opportunity for me to go beyond the palace corridors and see the empire's foreign politics firsthand. Interaction with the outside world demonstrated the wide reach of my power and influence in the palace. Sultanic changes in the palace were the biggest source of risk in my life. When a sultan died or was dethroned, all power balances and loyalties in the palace were rewritten. Eunuchs who allied with the new sultan's valid sultan would rise, while those loyal to the old system would quickly fall out of favor or be executed. These periods were times of strategic silence and accurately predicting the new power centers for me. A sultanic change could make me the Kisla-Akosk, or send me into exile in an instant. The feeling towards eunuchs among the public was a complex mixture of fear and respect. On one hand, we were powerful and wealthy figures closest to the Sultan and the harem. On the other hand, we were not fully accepted due to the reality of our past slavery and castration. Our power was different from that of an ordinary vizier. Our power was shadowy, secret, and indirect. When I established a foundation outside the palace, I gained the respect of the public, but this respect always came with a layer of fear. I could change the lives of the public with my power, and this defined my social status. My castration permanently cut me off from my original homeland and family. The palace became my only home and only family. Within me was a longing for my old origins and cultures, but I could not share this longing with anyone. This issue of belonging was one of the reasons why eunuchs were so tightly bound to each other. We, within the palace walls, had become estranged from the outside life and traditions, forced to form a new identity. For me, loyalty was based on my debt to the palace and my desire to belong, even before my allegiance to the Sultan or the valid Sultan. The exclusion and social perception resulting from sexual non-identity were more pronounced outside the palace. The public feared us, but also constantly gossiped about us. Inside the palace, the situation was different. My status had a power that transcended this issue. As an eunuch, I could move safely between the worlds of men and women. However, this situation made it impossible for me to form relationships with ordinary people outside. My identity was surrounded by an invisible wall. This granted me power within the palace, but condemned me to loneliness outside. The elderly years of the eunuch Arkas usually involved great financial security. They would either remain in an honorable position within the palace or retire with a large fortune to live outside the palace on their own foundations or properties. Retirement was the reward for a long service for me. However, even this retirement came with a feeling of loneliness. I had no family, only the people I had served. Nevertheless, the chance to spend the rest of my life in peace and wealth was a privilege a slave in Rome could only dream of. For me, old age meant earned tranquility and escape from palace intrigues. Eunuchs left behind lasting and significant works. Mosques, madrasas, fountains, and khans established by eunuchs like me were proof of our contribution to society. These foundations ensured that our name and power transcended the mortal palace intrigues. For me, this was not just an act of charity, but a way to immortalize my identity and honor. What was taken from my body was compensated by permanent works dedicated to the service of society. My legacy was written on stone and cement. So that was my life of power, solitude, and service in the golden cage of the Ottoman palace. After the rough shackles of Rome, here we learned that secret knowledge and discipline were the greatest power. After this journey, I understood how important personal privacy and merit in public service truly are. Which challenging era should we visit in our next video? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this alternate history journey, please don't forget to subscribe and like the video. See you in the next adventure. Take care and remember, the palace walls hold the secrets.